Ghosts and Writers. I'm Kate Spivey. I'm actually dealing with a little bit of a cold. I'm waiting on test results. I went to the doctor yesterday and got a COVID test done and a strep test, and then they said it would be like 3 to 5 days. So I can't go into work until I find out what's going on, but since I have a cold and I'm stuck at home, I decided I would just film today. So I'm gonna do a lot of filming today, mostly for my second channel, which is all K-pop related. So if you're interested in that, there is a link down below, and that's what I'm gonna be doing. But for now, I thought I'd just talk to you. Now I've got my tea and everything. Like, I'm not that sick. It's kind of one of those, like, it could just be a mild cold, like scratchiness in my throat, but if I keep drinking fluids, it's totally fine. And like mild headache, but not more than like acetaminophen can manage. My hair is not dry yet either. Like, I normally don't like filming with wet hair because when I go to like edit later, it really looks greasy to me, but just so you know, like my hair is just like not dry yet. It's somewhat dry, but like it's not totally dry, so that's why maybe it looks a little bit weird. Just to get that out of the way. Also, look at this. This is how my hair dries, okay? You know what, everyone was like into the curly girl method, and it was like, oh, everyone's got some kind of texture in their hair and you can find out like how much yours has by doing this. No, didn't work for me, okay? My hair is just like perfectly straight, and if you're envying that, that's really nice, but like I wish I had had any kind of texture growing up. Like I literally had multiple hairdressers be like, wow, you have the straightest hair I've ever seen, and it's like, oh, that's great, it'll always like fall like this, but also it can't hold a curl. There's no like mousse or hair gel that's strong enough to hold my hair into a curl for more than like a few hours at most. Like it just falls. It's just, this is all it's ever going to do is be straight. And so that has been disappointing. Like I've embraced it, but I am jealous of all of you who found out that you had curly hair. Didn't work for me. Literally my hair just dries like this. Oh, there he is making more mischief. What are you doing, dude? Come here, come say hi. Zuko's gonna say hi. He says no. Zuko doesn't like to be held. He likes to sit with me, but he doesn't actually like being held. Huh. You gonna be troublemaker today, huh? Whoop, where are we going? Where are you going? Okay, now that all that's out of the way, what I actually want to talk to you about today, I guess broadly, is the term intention and what intention means, and like, I'll just go into it, you know? This isn't like something I've structured, let's just talk. So I read this story on Tumblr recently, and so I don't know exactly how recent this story was. It was taken off of Twitter, put on Tumblr. It could have been from years ago, but it kind of hit me. So the story was Twitter posts by a librarian who was talking about a story that had come out of, I believe, the New York Times. And the story was that this woman rescued like 100,000 books or something from a landfill and donated them to schools. And it made her sound like this hero who was repurposing these perfectly good books that were thrown away for no reason. And the librarian then was the one who had thrown them away, and they were like hours and hours, like weeks of careful curating and going through these old books that had inaccurate information, outdated science, like horribly racist ideologies, like things like that. They had carefully gone through their entire collection, taken out those books so they could replace the collection with new books that had like updated science information. Like they were carefully going through all of this and then throwing those books away. And they said no one ever came and asked them like why those books were no good. The schools, now that they had those books donated to them who did need books, now had these trash books that were useless, that were wrong, that, you know, had been thrown away for a very good reason. And no one had ever stopped to think about like why the books had been taken out of circulation, why they'd been thrown into the landfill. The woman never came and checked with them. And the news article kind of painted them as a villain having thrown away all these perfectly good books, when honestly they were not perfectly good books, and they were making room for good books in their collection. And I thought it was really interesting to think about, like, this woman never went, she was just like, I'm holier than thou, gonna pick up all of these books out of the landfill and donate them, and then personally call the New York Times to talk about what a hero I am for having done this. And so it looks good on my Instagram. I think that they had mentioned she's like an environmentalist Instagrammer or something. The fault here was really with the journalist who took that story from her and never investigated any further. Like, they just presented it as, yeah, she took all these books and these schools are so happy to have them and why would anyone throw these away? But they never went back to the person who had thrown them away and was like, why did you do this? Like, they hadn't investigated far enough and then wrote this story that was honestly inaccurate. Like, these other schools who took the books are going to have to go through them and then end up throwing them away as well, is basically what it came down to. I just kept thinking about that story and thinking about, like, the woman's intention wasn't bad. Like, she was really trying to, you know, clear these books that were perfectly good out of a landfill and repurpose them. Like, that's not a bad intention. And the librarian throwing away all these books didn't have bad intentions either. They were trying to get accurate information in their library and get rid of things that that weren't useful anymore. Like, no one had any bad intentions here. So the only fault is really on the journalist, who then didn't follow up with the story. And we see it a lot in journalism, that you don't always get the, like, full picture because the journalist just didn't do the research that would normally be required of a journalist. Like, it is a field of study, basically, to be a journalist, and people often cut corners, and that's why we have news the way we do. Like, you think about, we have so many news networks that are for entertainment purposes. Like, you think about, like, Fox News was created as an entertainment network. Things like The Daily Show were created as an entertainment network. Now, they both entertain with news segments. Very different. Like, The Daily Show is well known for, especially when Jon Stewart was on it, and I think now with Trevor Noah as well, like, deeply researching anything they're going to talk about. Like, if they're going to have someone on the show, the host is going to know a lot about that person. They're going to have done their research. Like, they are really big on researching. So it comes across very journalistically because they have great hosts, they have a great team, but it's presented as entertainment. Fox News is more heavy towards the entertainment. They're more heavy towards trying to incite some kind of a reaction, because that's their entertainment model. Like, they'll have people on hoping that they'll then, you know, like, go into a screaming match with each other. Like, when they're presenting two different sides of an argument, they're getting people who are going to try and go at each other's throats. Like, that's their business model. And both things can be entertaining. But when we conflate that type of entertainment because it uses news stories with news stories, and then we start to get, like, lazy journalism from actual news sites, or just inaccurate journalism in general. Just journalists not going out and actually presenting real stories, or being fed stories to have a specific lean, rather than going and doing their own research and becoming experts in what they're talking about. Like, you start to get this really warped idea of what journalism is, and so you get a warped idea of, like, people's intentions for things. And I think we all, as a community, talked about this a lot with the Bad Art Friend. If you haven't heard about the Bad Art Friend, I really think Alexa Dunn did a pretty thorough, in-depth discussion, but I think a lot of people talked about it already, so I'm not going to go super in-depth into the Bad Art Friend. But it's kind of the same as that librarian story. Like, this person felt like they had done a wonderful, good thing and needed validation for it, and so reached out to a major news organization and was like, hey, I have a story for you. And they were like, great. And in this case, in the case of the Bad Art Friend, the journalist was like, great, and really and did the full research and didn't have to write, like, a story. They just presented facts straight down the board as the story got crazier and crazier. And in that case, the person's intentions weren't good. Like, nobody came out looking like a hero in that article, because everyone's intentions were bad. But I do have to say, okay, my thoughts on the Bad Art Friend, though, is that, like, anyone who does something, like, for good and then needs attention for it and demands attention for it, especially reaching out to people who are, like, acquaintances in your writing group, if you're the kind of person who is going out and seeking validation for something, yeah, people are obviously writing nasty things about you. Like, if you're going and seeking out, like, a congratulations for having donated a kidney, like, yeah, people are writing nasty things about you. People are writing you as the villain. Just, like, know that. Like, if that's your personality, that you have to go out and be like, hey, how come you didn't congratulate me? You are definitely the villain in somebody's story, especially if it's a writing group that you're going out and doing. Like, you should just assume that. just assume people are writing nasty things about you if you're that kind of crazy. Because honestly, like, people donate their kidney all the time. People donate kidneys for various reasons. I knew someone in high school who just decided they weren't going to need a kidney, turned 18 and went and donated a kidney, okay? Like, they didn't need a whole fanfare about it. That's just something that they did. People will do good things and not need a whole lot of validation. So if you're someone who does need that validation and then like needs to go on a rampage about it, people are writing you as the villain. And the fact that the other woman wrote a whole story that definitely was not very flattering, they definitely said nasty things, like, it seems like a logical progression of events, and nobody was looking like a good person, but also I side with the person who wrote the book. I don't know. I couldn't be for the kidney person, because I was just like, you needed that much validation that you actually like did all of this craziness and then reached out to a journalist, and the journalist couldn't even make you look good. Anyway, that was a whole tangent. But journalism. That was an example of someone like really just stating facts and not really taking a bend at anything, because there was just too much crazy going on and they could have made one person look better than the other and they just chose not to. Especially like back when I was taking classes for journalism back in college. That was back when climate change was really like a newer concept. People were really talking about it, and you constantly would see things where like the nightly news would present like, here's the leading scientist in this field and his lifetime of research about this subject, and they're saying that this is a problem and this is the things we can do and this is like how bad it is, and here's all of their research. And here is a CEO from a gasoline company, and his stance is, well, I hope climate change isn't real because that would be real bad for our bottom line, so I don't believe in it. And they would like present the two things and then be like, these things are equal value and should be weighted equally because they're both equally valuable opinions. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not true. Just because you need to show both sides of an issue is what I'm saying. Just because you need to present both sides of an issue does not mean that there are two sides of an issue that are weighted equally. In cases of something like scientific research, if one person is a scientist who has done extensive research and one person is just someone you found off the street who barely passed high school science class, they don't have equal weighted opinions on the subject of a science matter. You understand what I'm saying, right? Like, you can't present these two things as equal things because they are not. And yet constantly, because entertainment and news are so often conflated, a very easy thing for entertainment to do to be entertaining is to present those two things as equal. And you can have, you know, a high school dropout versus like the top leading expert in a field, duke it out, and that can be entertaining. Obviously not for the person who spent all that time getting the degree, but for the people watching it could be entertaining. But that isn't journalism, that's not news, that's not a valuable information. And the fact that we've conflated the two things is a problem. And so then you get things like lazy journalism being like, oh, this woman saved all of these books, where like, no, there was a reason that those books were thrown out and they didn't even look into it. They didn't even ask around about it, and ended up making someone who was, you know, carefully, thoughtfully curating a collection look really bad. This is throat coat tea. Oh, it's so good. Whenever you're presented any kind of facts, like, you have to kind of think about like the intention of everyone. Like, what is the intention of the journalist? Is it to present information, or is it to show you one side of an issue? Is it to sway your opinion one way or another, or is it to simply like lay out some facts? Like, what was the intention of the person picking up all of the books? They wanted a congratulations because they reached out to the journalist the same way the kidney woman reached out to the journalist. What was the intention of the librarian? When posting their story to Twitter, it was to vent some frustration that their hard work was being taken as something negative. But their hard work was the intention of trying to, you know, clean out their library of these outdated or incorrect books. And so having the full information, like, how would that have changed that journalist's story if they had looked into that? And I just think it's important to think about that kind of thing, especially in today's day and age where we just get so much information and so much of it is Looney Tunes information, you know? Like, the harder we think about the things that we're being like spoon-fed, the better, because you start to believe things really easily. And I mean, I'm reading these stories off of Tumblr, and Tumblr is the best social media platform for having like in-depth discussion. It's just simply set up so that like as posts come back around years and years later, people who are actual experts in fields have weighed in on opinions, and there can be long, in-depth, full of links to research. Like there can be really in-depth discussions on Tumblr. That doesn't mean all of them are that way. It doesn't mean all of them are correct. It doesn't mean that everyone weighing in has equally weighted opinions. Does it mean that their intentions are all bad, or does it mean their intentions are all good? Like, you have to learn how to weigh those things for yourself. And like reading things on Twitter, it's very short little posts and it doesn't really lend to in-depth discussions. So like we're hearing from this one librarian, but you know, I just read their tweets and like the one little article. I don't know for sure that that was the actual librarian and those were the actual books that were talked about in that story. Like it could have been that person's intention to try and make that woman look bad. And when we talk about intention in terms of journalism, it's something that is like so vitally important. But in terms of fiction, it can also be really, really important. Like, what is the intention of the story? Like, we talk about things like plot and character motivation and things, but when we talk about like authorial intent, there's sort of two different ways I feel about authorial intent. And that's that within a work of fiction, the things that the author intended should be within that work. Like you should be able to read the text and know what the author intended from it. Otherwise, the author's intentions don't matter. They didn't put them in the text, so they don't get included in the text. The text has to stand on its own in order for the author's intention to be there. However, you also have the other side of that, where like, what if the author's intention was very bad and damaging? Like, what if they were trying to villainize a minority group and they did it in this text in a very subtle way? At what point does the authorial intent like matter or not matter, I guess? It's hard to keep a brain train of thought when you're having a slight head cold, so bear with me, I'm doing my best. At the same time, if the author really genuinely didn't mean any harm, maybe didn't know any better, and wrote something that was deeply, deeply harmful, do you just ignore that, or do you just kind of gloss over that because it wasn't their intention? And I don't think you can. I think once you see something in a text, it does ruin the text, and it does not matter what the author's intention was. But to some extent also, like, taking the author's background into account also does change things. Like, I think you're allowed to also be like, there's no way they could have known this thing at that time. Oh, hi. Oh, she does want to come say hi. Oh, this is Toph. Hi. Have I introduced you on this channel? I'm not sure. I think so. Yeah, I've introduced her here. She's so soft. She's so soft and so tiny. She's really cute. And she's getting along great with everybody. I've lost my train of thought. So, we talk about things like with Huckleberry Finn using the N-word. That was a word that was commonly used in that day. We would not use it now. It also, with the narrative and the time that he was writing it and who the characters were and the setting and everything, it was the correct word for him to choose at that time, even though perhaps if he was writing it later, he would not have used that word. At the time, it was the correct word, and so we kind of have to forgive the text in that case, you know? Because when something is truly a product of its time and is truly like revolutionary for the time period, you have to look at it and respect it. Like, you can't actually take something from like a modern standpoint and be like, oh, at that time he totally could have published a book where he was even more revolutionary. Like, his thoughts at that time were super revolutionary. Like, people were not publishing books with that kind of content. And there are things that are more modern, like you talk about like LGBTQ plus representation in various popular books, and it has exploded. It is so great, but there are books that did not have any, or which might have retconned, or which maybe tried to slip in later books that could not have published initially any kind of content like that due to the time period when they were published. We could say any book should have had more of this or that, but you also look at the context of when they came out and whether or not they were going to get through censors, or were going to be considered appropriate, or even were something that people were actively thinking about who were outside of those communities. I think sometimes because we have so much information going on and so much so many different opinions, we forget about times when things were new, like that there wasn't a lot of discussion about certain things. I'm thinking like the concept of someone being transgender was something that existed for like forever, but it isn't something that was wildly talked about, common knowledge kind of thing. It wasn't something where people commonly knew someone who was transgender, who talked about people being transgender, who saw celebrities who were transgender 10, 20 years ago. It was still something that most people didn't interact with in their daily life. Someone who had no transgender character, I'm just using this as an example, there are lots of other examples, but let's just say someone who had no transgender characters in a manuscript or in a series of manuscripts, it could be that this is something that they had not come across in their own daily life up to a point. But then someone publishing right now, like this isn't something that they could have easily avoided. It would be something that they were actively avoiding. Am I even saying this right? The fact is, like, authorial intent has an extent to which we can't ignore it, just simply because there are texts that are good texts that were good, that are still good, but which were a product of their time. There are also texts where, looking back, like the authorial intent, you can't ignore it because it was bad. And I guess the one that comes to mind the most was probably the Harry Potter series, because we've learned so much about J.K. Rowling. It's hard to look back at anything and not to pretend to be ignorant, to still enjoy a series that had problems that people who were in other groups outside of my personal experiences were already saying were issues, that those issues became compounded and way too obvious to ignore. I was just thinking about it with that story, and I feel like there are so many stories that come up. Like the bad art friend had people reeling, partly because it was just wild, but partly because it's very close to home. A lot of us here on AuthorTube are part of writing circles, and a lot of us know somebody who be a little crazy, and you just think like the things you say back and forth to each other where you're just like, that person be crazy. Or someone says or does something, you're like, man, they would make a good villain in my book, and you write them in. And you read a story like that where like lawsuits are happening, like lawyers are involved and news articles are writing about them. Like you read about that and it's like, that's kind of scary, because this is something that we all do. We all vent as writers by writing. And to know that that kind of thing is like not sacred anymore. Some people's intentions aren't good and some people's intentions are good. And sometimes people's good intentions, they go about in a bad way, like donating your kidney and then insisting that every person who has ever been in any kind of Facebook group with you personally acknowledge and congratulate you on your selflessness. That ain't selfless at all. That's crazy. Oh my God. Oh, she just keeps coming over and rubbing up against the camera. What's up? Are you just bored? Oh, where are you going? Anyway, that was like my 2 cents on that. I didn't mean to get into the bad art friend. It was mostly that story about the book. So I was just like, I feel so bad for the librarian, honestly, who like spent all that time going through them only to have that like thrown in their face. And them knowing that another librarian is gonna have to go through that same collection and throw them right back out again. That like someone else's time is now wasted because of someone else's good intentions like that. But how good are your intentions if you have to get congratulated for them, you know? Like that she had to reach out to a newspaper and be like, hey, look at me, and now plug my Instagram. Does that mean actually she's kind of the villain in the story, or is she still a good person because what she was trying to do was clean up a landfill and supply books to schools, which are both good things? But if you're doing it only for attention, kind of like donating your kidney and needing a lot of support afterwards from people who barely know you. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, but I think the main thing is know how to think critically. Like it's just so important to not take something at face value, to like stop and think. And like even me just now thinking about the fact that like I don't know for sure that that librarian's version of the story is entirely accurate either. But I'm also not a journalist talking about this. I'm me, Case Spivey, here on YouTube, rambling at you about it. Like if I were doing this as a journalistic story and I failed to stop and be like, who threw these books away? Why'd you do it? You are missing a large piece of the story. Like what pieces are being left out, and are they intentionally being left out? Are they being left out because someone was lazy? Like it does matter. It does make a difference. I think also we just need to think about the fact that journalism and entertainment for a long time have been very much pushed into similar categories, but that it is important to get news as news, facts, and full understandings of a story with deep research, rather than just taking in all of our news as entertainment, because that is not useful. It's not healthy to get all of our news that way. And we've seen that as a society very clearly, especially from 2016 to 2020. We got some strong educations in how that can be problematic, and we really need to think about that kind of problematic, widespread misinformation, when it's not even like fully misinformation, just skewed information, just information coming at you from an entertainment standpoint, can be very, very harmful. And missing a large piece, an important piece of the puzzle, can give you an opinion on something that is not at all helpful or useful or accurate or correct in any way. And you have to think about, like, you have to think for yourself on some of these things, and also demand that people give you the full information rather than just pieces, and that the pieces that they're giving you are equally weighted pieces and not just some crazy person yelling from the streets, when there's also someone who has spent most of their life researching the same thing. Like, they're not equally weighted opinions. And that is all I have to say for today. I will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. I'm trying to go back to posting videos on Wednesdays. We'll see how long I can do it for. I'm trying to not just post anything. Today, you're getting a bit of a rant, and hopefully it is helpful and useful. Definitely give me your opinions down below. Like, I'll link the bad art friend, but I'll also link Alexa Dunn's video. If I can find that Tumblr article again, I will link that as well. Try and cover all my bases for you, but if not, hopefully I will see you back here again. Please like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon, because I have one of those. And I have another channel if you're into K-pop. Go and check that out as well. I'm going over K-pop lyrics over there. It's really been a lot of fun, and that's what I'm doing for the rest of today. Drink my tea in between though. Throat is really kind of like cottony, I guess is the best way to put it. It's like scratchy without being like the most painful. I mean, I've had mono before. It's not like that. Hopefully by the time this goes up, I will have my test results. I'll know I can go back to work. But yeah, for now, I'm just nursing a cold here at home and filming K-pop videos. And that is all for me today, for real. I'll talk to you again very soon. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. Bye.